Matt Keister here. That's the Kennebec River in the background in Norridgewock. We're at the site of Osula Park in Norridgewock today, where the mill stream enters the Kennebec River. Now, in 1775, the Kennebec would have been about 22 or 23 feet lower behind me. It would have looked much different when Benedict Arnold's army passed through here. But the foggy mornings like you see, the later sunrises in September, right, that would have been what greeted Arnold and his men as they first began their mission up the Kennebec River. Leaving Newburyport, Massachusetts, coming north on ships, there was 11 ships that eventually arrived on the southern end of the Kennebec near where Gardner and Pittston are today. Now, we have to ask ourselves a question. Why would Benedict Arnold, Daniel Morgan, Aaron Burr, some of the most famous names in American history, lead a mission of 1,000 men, literally through a howling wilderness, as the title of the book says, to strike at Quebec? And why would they take that chance? And that is the background to the series of the videos and the story here, all right, about the first part of the American Revolution. So I'm going to do a digital tour, kind of a walking tour, to bring you to some of the different spots where Arnold and his men moved during that time period of the American Revolution. So now Benedict Arnold goes down in history as the most famous traitor of the American Revolution, but during this time period that wasn't the case. He was a trusted officer in the army, and the attempt to take Quebec was taken very seriously. George Washington authorized it. And the Kennebec River was part of the natural corridor that the Native Americans had used for years to move between Maine and Canada and the St. Lawrence River system. The colonists and the British were aware of this. It had been defended before as a possible invasion route during the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, from 1754 to 1763. So there was knowledge of the passage in the corridor. So the Kennebec River was about to play a pivotal role in the early part of the American Revolution. Right here in your backyard is some of that history. In order to understand Benedict Arnold's expedition to Quebec, we first need to understand the background. Although the fighting at Lexington and Concord did not really come as a shock to many, ultimately it was the events of the April 19th, 1775 fighting, both at Lexington and Concord and later Battle Road, as the British Army retreated back to Boston, that was going to set the background for Arnold's expedition to Quebec. After the British retreat back into Boston across Boston Neck, they were in a very difficult strategic position. There were about 4,000 British regulars hemmed in by the Army of Continental Volunteers that had camped on the hills surrounding Boston with the intent of laying siege to Boston and penning the British there. Now, on June 17th, the British attempted to raise the siege of Boston with the famous attack on Bunker Hill. Suffered heavy casualties at the hands of the colonists. Although they had won a tactical victory, the losses were so severe that it convinced the British to simply hunker down in Boston and wait for reinforcements from England. Now, following the fighting at Bunker Hill, Congress had originally rejected a plan to invade Canada. But the pressure from the New York colonies and the New England colonies very rapidly increased because they feared a British invasion southward, either down through the Hudson River system with Mohawk allies or down through possibly the Chaudière system, although from Montreal was much more likely. So on June 27th, 1775, Congress authorized the plan to invade Canada. The plan that was finally approved for the invasion of Canada was a two-armed pincer movement. One was a group of soldiers that would move up Lake Champlain under Philip Schuyler, and they would attack Montreal and then head down the St. Lawrence Seaway, while at the same time a second group of 1,100 men under the command of Benedict Arnold of Fort Ticonderoga fame would move north up through the Kennebec and cross the height of land through the wilderness of Maine and come out at the shores on the opposite side, the south side of the St. Lawrence Seaway system from Quebec. Now, it's from this point here that our story of the ill-fated invasion of Quebec under Benedict Arnold begins, with the departure of the forces from Newburyport, Massachusetts, and the arrival at the Reuben Colburn House on the banks of the Kennebec River on September 21st, 1775.